So for the LeVasseur article, I would argue that he justifies his research question by pointing out that suicide among adolescents is an important public health problem. So that kind of puts the scope of the problem into context. Bullying is highly prevalent and an important risk factor for suicide. Both suicide and bullying vary by sexual, gender, and racial ethnic identities. There's a growing body of literature about the importance of intersecting identities on health. So not just the single identity of sexual identity or racial identity, but how they intersect or combine can have an impact on health. Some studies have found differences in suicide outcomes by intersecting identities, but no studies to date have evaluated how intersecting identities modify the bullying-suicide association. So when you are writing your literature review or the introduction to your analytic paper, you don't want to just summarize the literature. You shouldn't write, Smith et al. Did a study and found X. Jones et al. Did another study and found Y. Diaz et al. Also looked at this topic and found Z. Instead, you want to synthesize the literature into a narrative going through the arguments justifying your analyses, and thus lead the reader to the conclusions that what is missing, what we still do not know but really need to know, is exactly what your analysis will answer. And this is where putting all that information from the literature into a table can help you group similar papers together so that you can use that information in your structured argument. So, for example, you would say Smith, Jones, and Diaz conducted studies showing X, Y, and Z. However, none of these studies looked at A. It is important to know about A because A is very common among population B and might explain their increased risk for certain health problems, right? So here I put Smith, Jones, and Diaz's papers together, and instead of having a separate sentence for each author, each paper, I kind of put them together in a summary of what all three of those papers found. So when organizing your literature review, one suggestion for how you might outline it is to start out with the extent of the problem. How common is the health outcome or the exposure being studied, or how serious are the consequences of this disease or exposure? Then talk about what the studies published in the literature have found so far in terms of the distribution or causes of the health outcome or the exposure that you're focusing on. So this is sort of maybe the beginning half of your paper and of your introductory section, and for describing the literature and what we know so far, you really want to synthesize. So as I said, you don't summarize every single paper. You put the papers that found similar results together, and then you might have a sentence or two explaining how they differ in terms of study design or population, and so on. So you want to summarize and synthesize the literature rather than describing every single paper on the topic individually. So now that you've explained what we know based on the literature, now the next step is to point out the weaknesses and gaps in the current literature and what questions remain about the health outcome exposure that you're interested in. You want to explain why these questions are important. And in terms of that, you might talk about their public health importance, how they are necessary to better understand causation, or look at aspects of a theory that needs testing. And then you will conclude with the fact that you are going to answer this question in your paper using data X. So when you think about what questions remain that you're going to address in your paper, these questions don't have to be completely new and innovative. They might just be questions refining what we already know to better elucidate causal mechanisms. So this could be like a hypothesis around mediation, to identify reasons for different or discrepant results across studies or populations, like maybe you think there's an effect modifier in play here. You might do a study that is only to rule out bias or confounding as an explanation. So maybe there have been a number of studies that all use similar methods and they're all prone to the same confounder and none of them were able to adjust for that. And maybe you have data on that confounder, so you could look at the same association, but adjusting for the confounder that all the other studies did not adjust for. Or maybe you want to see if known associations are similar in different populations. So when you're talking about associations in different populations, what you're really talking about is effect modification, right? So is the association different in the United States versus in Kenya? And if you think it's going to be different in Kenya from in the US, you have to have a reason why you think that's different. And essentially, you would be exploring whether the association is modified by location or some characteristic of the population in that location. So if you think about the LeVasseur paper, which of these do you think it is addressing? Is it better elucidating causal mechanisms, identifying reasons for potential differences across populations, ruling out bias or confounding as an explanation, or looking to see if associations are similar in a different population? So I might argue that the LeVasseur paper really focuses on effect modification by intersecting identities, right? He's trying to identify reasons for different results across different subpopulations within the United States. And those subpopulations are defined by intersection of gender, sexual, and ethnic identities. So now let's try mapping out the argument from the introduction of the Montgomery paper. This is also a paper that came out of this class and was published after the class ended. And read through just the introduction part and see if you can map out her argument justifying her analysis.